Okay, so there are two main kinds of loops in Python. The while loop, which is presented first in the book, and it's kind of like the general purpose loop. It can do anything. It can count. It can, keep going while you haven't reached a sentinel value, all kinds of things with the while loop. But there's also the for loop. The for loop is a really good loop for counting, especially when you know how many times ahead of time you want to go through the loop. Like, for example, for num in range 10, print num will loop 10 times and print the number from 0 to 9. But that's the important thing about range. When you say range 10, it means the numbers 0 to 9. Yes, it'll loop 10 times, but it means from 0 to 9. Okay, so that's the for loop. There's good examples of that in the textbook. Now, for the hotel example, you know how many times ahead of time you want to loop. So because you're going to ask the user num floors equals int input enter number of floors, right? And if the user enters, so now we want to base this on num floors. Now we want to start at 1. So instead of just ending at num floors, if he enters 10, it'll do it 10 times. We want to go from 1 to num floors plus 1. So if he puts in 10, we want to go from 1 to 10. So that's why we have to put this here and make it be 11 so that it'll go from 1 to 10, because that's the nature of the for loop. And I should put floor, because we're talking about the floor going floor 1, floor 2, floor 3, floor 4. So now if I say enter number of floors 10, it'll go from 1 to 10. Okay, because I said num floors plus 1 here. Now if we have 14 floors, it'll go from 1 to 14, but in most North American hotels anyway, we don't have a floor 13 because we're superstitious. We go 1 to 12 and then 14, 15 if we have 14 floors. Right, so our last floor is going to be 15 and we're going to skip 13. So if they enter more than 12 floors, if it's greater than 12, we want to go like that. So if he puts in 13, it'll go from 1 to 14, skipping floor 13. Now, so this doesn't change at all because that's still true the way the range works. But if we hit floor 13, then we want to skip the remainder of the loop, because if we're hitting floor 13, we don't want to do anything because there is no floor 13. So we use continue because that skips the iteration for 13 and goes on to 14. Okay, so if num floor is greater than 12, we're going to put in a plus 1. So if he enters 13, num floors will be 14. So it'll go, this will be 15, so that we do go from 1 to 14, skipping floor 13. So if I run this now, if he puts in 5, if he puts in 5, it'll go 1 to 5. If he puts in 13, it'll go 1 to 14, skipping 13. So same thing, if he puts in 15, it'll go 1 to 16, skipping 13. Okay, so that's the hotel's use of the for loop. Now the for loop's also useful. You can count down with the for loop as well. For num in range. So let's say we want to count from 10 down to, from 20 down to 10. We want to go, each time our step value will be minus 2. So it'll go 20, 18, 16, 15. So when we do this, we see we don't make it all the way down to 10 because it's always, less than, we don't go to the full terminal value. We always go one step less. So we actually have to go down to 8 if we want to go from 20 down to 10 by 2's. Okay, so that's the for loop in a nutshell. The for loop is very handy for counting. It's easier than the while loop for counting. Just like how we read lines from files, it was much easier to do for line in file object rather than using read line in a while loop. So for loop just makes it a little easier for us.